Thank you for having me, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in Poland, so I'm really excited to be here. I like to put this on here as the first slide because my name is sometimes a bit complicated. It's a West African name, but if you pronounce it, the very last one, the phonetically is shay. Happy to have conversations after we have this presentation, so feel free to approach me and talk directly with me. Today I want to talk a little bit about the work that I did during my studies in RCA with Mikołaj, and a little bit about what's happened afterwards, and hopefully it will inspire some of you to build tools. This will be a presentation really about building tools. So a little bit about my background. I think it's really relevant to how I got to the point where I'm at now and why I'm so passionate about building tools. I was a carpenter before formally going to study in academia. I then studied mechanical engineering. I was really fascinated about building stuff and making things. I didn't know anything about industrial design at the time. I just wasn't something that was in my ecosystem. So I was thinking if I become an engineer, I can actually build things. And I learned a little bit about industrial design as I was an engineer working professionally, and ended up working for a relatively large industrial design firm in Taipei, Taiwan, where I learned a ton about design. So it was really helpful. And I also learned that like my previous background always helps push myself forward career-wise. So I learned a lot from carpentry about how things work, a lot about engineering, and from engineering I learned a lot about how to actually scale and mass produce things. And then as an industrial design, I learned about how the poetry between design and engineering can allow you to create really good resolved design propositions. And that's what led me to study innovation design engineering, where this kind of juncture of the disciplines between designing, engineering, sustainability, and so forth. And now I'm a founder, which is a completely new territory for me, where I'm learning how to build teams, which is, I think, really important for designers to think about and do as well. That will be a different talk, maybe next year if you guys invite me back. So this is Gravity Sketch, and I want to start by just giving you an overview of our company, and then we're going to go deeper into this. So essentially, it's a tool that lets you explore ideas spatially. I really am a strong believer in sketching. I think sketching is such a great tool to communicate. It's not just about art, it's really about saying what words and what linguistics and literature won't give you. A sketch is an extremely powerful tool, and we tried to do this in the three-dimensional space because most of our ideas are three-dimensional if you think about it, unless you're a graphic designer. And the whole world is 3D, right? Everything around us is built in 3D. And it takes a very arduous process to bring these things to life because we rely on 2D means to represent our 3D ideas when the moment first strikes. And we'll go through this a bit, but here's the kind of classic problem here. You're thinking in 3D, and you're jumping directly to something 2D to represent that 3D thought. That's the first thing you do. And if you're not really well trained in that 2D medium, it's a real struggle to get that thought out. So that first back and forth session that's happening is with yourself. You're trying to talk to yourself about this idea. You're saying, okay, does this look right? Does this feel right? And then you have to do that really resolved with another team to bring that into a digital 3D solution. And then finally, you have to make a prototype, and sometimes that goes back and forth as well. So it's a lot of steps just to unlock an idea. And how we want to work as designers is we want about thinking about something in 3D, and we want to be able to represent it directly in 3D as instantaneously as possible, and then having one prototype that is as close to the true thing as possible. So we want to work in days, not months. And if we think about like 3D in our everyday lives, it's really not on a lot of people's radar. At the moment, you know, we're kind of here on this journey where it's a professional grade tool, but there is a moment in time with the new technologies that are coming out where 3D is going to be commonplace. It's just how we're going to compute and interact and communicate. Like being here physically has something totally different than seeing Matt behind a screen. I'm sure his message is great, but the kind of interaction that you're getting from my body language, the way that we're going to have conversations after this talk, I mean, this has a completely different way of communicating. That's all 3D. It's all spatial, right? And with you know, this gentleman here, who I think we all know, he's democratizing 3D, right? This is half the price of the smartphone that you have in your pocket right now. So I can buy 2 of these for the price of an iPhone. And that gives me a whole new way of communicating that's limitless, not only like kind of the 6-inch screen that I have in my pocket. I think this is an extremely bold move from this company, and I think if we do use this as designers, as a tool to learn and build on top of this, we can dictate the narration of the future of this medium. Let's see if, okay. So I'm going to go to the meat of the presentation. So I firmly believe that everything starts with a sketch. This bottle starts with a sketch, this little clicker that I have, this microphone, someone sketched it before it became a physical thing. And if you look at history, we've used sketching to represent three-dimensional ideas for a very long time. And it's only until recently, really, that we use the laws of perspective to articulate 3D in a spatial sense and try to communicate this. So we don't have a long, rich history of this medium. This was our format. This is how we work today. This is the kind of platform that we work from. And this is our interface as industrial designers. I think it's still one of the most intelligent, amazing interfaces in the world. You can bring anything to it. You can sketch, you can represent ideas, you can move things around. It's transformative. And we leverage like a series of these illustrations of the 3D idea to share and kind of organize our thoughts in the spatial world. And when we get to moving into digital 3D, this is our new platform. It's a fixed dimension with a fixed set of actual tools that you can operate through. And we have this kind of system of navigating. So it's completely different, actually, than what we had in the previous slide. So you're kind of going through a lot of literature to understand and unlock some of the tool set. And when you jump into 3D, you're faced with this interface. So it's kind of getting rigid, and that's making you decide on certain things that you may not be ready to decide on as a designer. You're losing the ambiguity. And when you collaborate, you're collaborating behind the 30-inch display. So you're really not getting into the nuances of the design. You're really focused on execution at this stage. And this is a bit of a shame because you shouldn't be forced into execution so quickly on your design journey and discovery. And at the end of the day, you're outputting this drawing. I know I'm being very dramatic here, but you're outputting this drawing and you're giving it to the factory so they can manufacture. So then you're relying on someone else to take this and extract 3D from it. So let's look at the way that these tools work. You're taking each step up the ladder and you're hoping that you don't make any mistakes. That's how you have to work in these 3D systems these days. But as creatives, we prefer this. We prefer to like open up the file, we know what size the document is, and then we jump into creativity. We just let our brains explode into the creative space. When we're done, we want to make sure we save it in the right format, we export it in the right way, and we're able to save it securely. So that's why we have a logical step on each side of the equation. And this is kind of the way that we want to formulate our approach to designing a software. So these tools are really interesting, and this poses a great opportunity where we can leverage the sketch, which is such a powerful tool, and hopefully bring something that's unique to the market. But it's interesting because it sells this really amazing vision of bringing the sketch feel into the digital space. But what it doesn't solve the third dimension. And so you still are forced to see things and extract things three-dimensionally through 2D means. And this is the calculation that your brain does. So this is all just a set of lines, but we're extracting 3D out of this somehow. And we're trained to do this, and I'm going to talk about this in a moment. This is not something that comes natural to us. We're not born with this as human beings. We use that principle to generate a ton of different perspectives of a certain idea or a sketch, and this is almost poetic or artistic in nature to kind of extract that idea and then share that with someone else. And when you have things like architecture, sometimes you're limited to the number of versions or iterations you can make just due to the size, scale of what you're building. In your brain, this is often what's happening. You're taking this idea in 3 dimensions and you're kind of extracting and exploding it to these plan views, because this is how we've been trained and taught over the years to think. So we tapped on this really interesting theory of multiple intelligence by Howard Gardner, and it states that we have 9 intelligence, and humans have varying different skill sets in these intelligence. And so when we look at academia and in the classic form, we tend to be judged on our intelligence around linguistics and mathematics, and we kind of neglect all this other stuff. All this other stuff is really important to the way that we communicate as humans. So what we want to do as a team is focus in on the spatial side of things. We're talking about creating and designing in 3D. Why don't we focus specifically on creating an interface that allows you to use your spatial intelligence to operate? And this is a really interesting example here. So this is my niece. This is a stegosaurus. She sketched a stegosaurus. And there's no perspective here. There's there's something really poetic about this, and it's very clear what it is, right? Like, I don't think we're struggling to understand what this is. Her source material was a toy. So she hasn't been inundated with the laws of perspective, what's a good sketch, what's a bad sketch, is it communicating properly? I mean, this is communicating a stegosaurus. It may not be communicating a stegosaurus that's the exact toy, but it's communicating in that way. And so let's take a mind that has yet to be forced and manipulated and molded into this very structured way of thinking and see if this can allow us to unlock some ideas around how to build a solution, a tool, so everyone can operate in 3D. The kind of unfortunate reality is that my niece in just a few years will be stuck with this. She's going to be forced to put together a piece of IKEA furniture in a very strict laws of perspective instructional manual. And this is tough for some people. As designers, we see this and we're like, okay, we kind of get this, but we've been trained to do this. A lot of people actually struggle to see 3D in this way. So we have this device. This comes out. We just talked about this a bit ago. Now, this can be looked at as a gaming device. It can be looked at as something nerdy. Actually, when I first saw this thing, I was like, I never want to wear this crap on my face. This is so weird. I'm going to put something on my face and like block out the interaction I can have with the rest of the world. But then I started to do a little bit more due diligence on this, and I realized this is actually a super empowering tool. It's a brand new medium with no rules. There's 30, 40 plus years of computing interfaces that we have to respect as designers. This, we can actually tap into the physical world. It has a new way of operating, a new way of engaging, and as designers, we can dictate this future. And I felt as my background in carpentry, industrial design, mechanical engineering, I felt like, why don't we as designers take the lead on building tools for ourselves on this new medium? So this is what Microsoft is proposing. It looks really exciting, right? It's a bunch of screens in front of me. I think this is so non-creative, non-inspiring. We're essentially taking the classical UI, UX and sticking it in front of us as floating panels. That's not even how we lay out like our real world spaces. I think interior designers could have done a much better job. So I tried to look at the world around us, the physical world around us, and how we operate with physical tools and physical mediums. So can we bring the element of directly manipulation of materials, the way that we use our body to express ourselves? When I say something is big and I do this, you kind of understand that, right? If I say something small, I do this. So how do we bring those gestures into this new way of operating? And then also rules are really important. If you have free form, no rules, that's a big challenge because you're actually not able to step out and be as creative as fast as possible. But when you have a tool like Lego, it's one rule. You stack one brick on top of the next. So the creative understands the rule really quickly, and then they break the rule. And I think this is really, really, really powerful. So trying to bring all these principles into our way of thinking about building the solution. And so here's just a couple of examples of that in practice. So looking at the real world and how do we imitate the real world in the digital space, but then amplify it. There's also this kind of hidden rule that I've started to think about a lot is around being language agnostic. So here we have our cutlery. I don't need a label for forks, spoons, and knives. I know that forks are grouped with forks, and the bigger forks are grouped with the bigger forks, the smaller forks are grouped with the smaller forks. Labels, I don't need to have all the text here that says don't wash this in the washing machine. I have a washing machine with a symbol crossed out. Now, obviously I have to rely on graphic designers to help support with that communication flow, but it's a very powerful illustration. And then finally colors and illumination and brightness. Car rear is red, and when you push the brake, the red illuminates. So these are all visual cues that we can bring to the software as well. Again, we're trying to lean on spatial intelligence, not linguistics and mathematics. And so when we look at creatives and how they build their tools, they actually are picking up materials and building inspiration from their built environment to create bespoke tools. And so how do we do this in the digital space? We have some really powerful tools and open source tools that we can build and start building our own tools with, right? And that's exactly what we did as a team. We started to look at first building these really primitive experiments that help unlock certain things that we might be able to see. So this is a series of layers that you sketch on top, and you can have a 3D image as you move. And then we then expanded that and kind of exploded that to how do we take those rough ideas and then bring the technology in an open source way to actually produce a holistic solution. And so this was our first proposition. It was a tablet that you'd sketch on, and then you'd be able to like rotate the different axes that you're sketching. It was very cumbersome, but this is before we had access to some of the commercial available VR headsets and immersive technology on the market today. When these headsets did release, this was the interface that we created. So we felt the best interface was no interface. Now that's better to do, or easier to said than done. So we do have a bit of interface, which you will see in the moment, but this is kind of the vision, the North Star. Like if we can just create at the speed of thought, that would be amazing. It was really important as we started to grow our team to build a philosophy around the user experience. We didn't want this to become a tool that essentially forces you to learn everything about the tool before you can be capable and competent in it. So at the very top layer, we want to focus on creation. It's just about getting your idea out. And the feeling that we want our users to have is, this is fun. Like creating is fun, sketching is fun. And as you go deeper into the understanding, and maybe over time you understand the software, you're able to explore, you're able to actually push yourself and really unlock tools. But you can also stay in any of these layers and get a lot of value out of the tool. It's kind of similar to sketching. If you practice more, you really become a better sketcher. If you just use sketching to quickly get an idea out, then that's fine as well. So the pen and paper, there's nothing about a pen and paper that makes you better or worse. It's really about what you bring to that medium. And when we prototype tools, and we're going to get into some videos here in a minute, but when we prototype tools, we try to use the physical world as an example. So this is an experiment that we ran where we were looking at making a measurement tool, and one of our developers said, like, okay, it's very easy to just make a measuring tape, but maybe we can make something that doesn't need numbers. We all know how big a banana is when we hold it in our hand, so maybe we should measure everything by bananas. I know it sounds like a really silly, crazy idea, but these are the kind of things that we can start ideating and building in the digital space and really challenging the conventional norms. Especially if your ideas are always going to remain digital, like who's to say that it needs a millimeter accurate dimension? Maybe it just needs 10 bananas. That's how big it is, right? But it's really fun to prototype and kind of illustrate and create in this way. So this is our interface here. We focus on grabbing as a gesture, just like you would in the normal world. So you have this VR controller, you can just reach out and grab. If you want to scale something up, you reach out and grab it, and with the other hand, you grab it and you pull it apart. And this requires no speaking, no literacy, no input of data whatsoever. And then same with like selecting a color. We have like this color picker that you're able to grab and hold, and then when you touch it with another color, you're able to extract that color, very similar to how you might have done in science class. So trying to use cues from the physical world to amplify the abilities of in the digital space. This is file management. We were thinking a lot about file management, and everything is so linear and gridded, but what if you did like grouping, like you group things together in the spatial world? You have all this space around you. Why do you need to have like a gridded system? So these are some of the experiments that we're running around this as well. And then finally, like dimensioning and measurement. This is unfortunately a bit rigid. I think you have to be rigid if you want to export it to something physical, but it's still quite interesting to explore this idea. So we see the future design studio something like this. We don't think everyone is just going to abandon all of their existing tools, but rather have your iPad, your desktop PC, some sketch inspirations on the wall, your 3D printer, and your VR headset. This is just a tool. It's not a replacement. We're not telling you to like throw away all your skills and like adopt this new skill. But as designer, collect your tools. Have a tool chest. When you go to work, you have all your tools. You put your tools down and you pick the best tool for the job. And if it is 3D design, 3D creation, 3D problem solving, why not work directly in the digital 3D space? And from us, we look at a lot of opportunities as a business. Where can we have the direct impact? Where is design at like the highest peak in terms of what the customer will appreciate? And so automotive is the most expensive thing that you purchase in your lifetime. It's highly predicated on design. They spend a ton of money on design. So we decided to target them first, and we've driven amazing returns on their investment in this new technology. We see teams that are reducing their man hours by about 60% using digital design as opposed to some of the conventional forms here. Also in footwear, a really interesting industry where they don't have a digital tool that they use on the regular basis. They tend to work very traditional still. Even companies like Adidas and Nike working in a very traditional way, they don't really have this kind of digital access to the three-dimensional space. So tools like this that actually allow them to have this kind of digital craft experience are really powerful for designers to transition from physical mediums into the digital space. And for us, we see design as a nucleus. Design is just one part of the bigger chain that's happening. Like the idea starts with the designer, but then the designer shares that idea with engineers, project managements, and so forth, and they're able to kind of expand within the organization. So we need to build tools that allow the designer to articulate their vision. Again, a sketch is a communication aid, so we need to build communication bridges, to Matt's conversation, for the rest of the organization. And so this is what's happening in teams. You have a designer who is speaking to a technician through images. The technician is maybe speaking to the fabricator, and then the designer maybe has to send a reference. It's just a really messy conversation stream. And so what we're building now as a company is a really clear way to communicate directly in 3D, all together in the same 3D spatial environment. And we're going to show you a little bit of that in a moment. But what this allows us to do is also bring leadership in very early on in a project so that they can validate things before they allocate resources and more time and money is consumed. So here's what it looks like. We have a designer and a manager who are working together in a 3D space. You can also bring in your engineering, your marketing team, and you're actually able to have a very rich conversation without building a physical prototype. You're actually able to sketch from nothing or plan out scenarios with these avatars and really try to problem solve before going any deeper into kind of some of the physical aspects. I love this example here. We have designers from Adidas who are sketching out ideas around a foot as opposed to a shoe last, or this kind of clay model exploration with automotive without even making a physical clay model. So it's a really brilliant way of exploring ideas really quickly and bringing in everyone so that they're on the same page. They understand the exact same thing before committing any costs. And what we're building now is a way that we can bring people in that don't have VR. We understand that this technology is still something that people are a bit fearful of. And so what we've decided to do is look at existing technologies and how do we learn from them before we start designing and developing. So this is Bluescape. It's very similar to Miro, where you can kind of import an image and then you can sketch on top of it. And so what we've been trying to do is find a way to bring these two technologies together or maybe make a version of our own. So here we have a car designer with some of our design team who are exploring this new way of working. I might want to just speed through this actually, but essentially what we do is we're kind of, what I want to illustrate here is you can use existing technology to kind of springboard your ideas as opposed to trying to build it from the ground up. So we tried to use like 3 different pieces of technology to simulate a workflow, and now we're building like a 2D version of our application that can talk to the 3D version based on the insights that we drive here. This is a brilliant example, a Czech Republic company called Svat. They work with Skoda very closely. They were able to take, in just our software, the idea all the way through to the physical clay model. And this took them a fraction of the time of what they would normally do. Same in footwear. We're seeing teams of designers, without using anyone technical, bring their ideas all the way to a 3D printed proposition on their own. And this is kind of like a transformative thing for them. And finally, I just want to talk on like what can you do around the tools in the digital space. I think we're just one application. And I love that we're design-led and we're designers that are developing this, but there's tons of different applications that need to be developed, and there's like a lot of space that's still there that we can tap into. So with just the smartphone in your pocket, you could already start exploring these 3D spaces digitally. I mean, this is all free software that you can just download and start figuring out what is a 3D interface or what is a 3D proposition that you want to go forward with. So the tools are already here. You don't have to buy a $300 headset or a €300 headset. Like, you have this smartphone, few bits of technology that you can download, and then plenty of YouTube videos and tutorials that you can work with. So I really do encourage you to explore like the digital 3D space, maybe a digital twin to your 3D physical idea that you're proposing as well. I really like to kind of talk about this example. It should be fun, right? This is Minecraft. It has over 150 million users, and this is not considered a CAD software, but it is the widest used 3D software in the world. And I find this really impressive. You've created a fun experience that allows millions of people to create 3D, and like, why don't we have like our CAD tools that way? Why don't we have our 2D tools that way? Like, this is a question that we need to ask ourselves as designers. We shouldn't be forced to learn these tools that are painful for us. We should be having fun designing. Designing should be a joyous experience. And I'm going to finally end on this one. We didn't really innovate this idea. This idea came in 1949, right? We just have the technology now to express this. And so how many other ideas were like this back then that we now have the technology to explore? And I feel like we should always kind of look back to go forward, but not look back to be beholden on what's possible and what's not possible. I really love this example here, and it kind of just makes me humble. Like, I didn't invent anything. What we did was we took an idea that has been in the human psyche for so long, and we used technology to unlock it. And I feel like as designers, we all have that responsibility, and I certainly encourage you guys to do so. So thank you very much.